Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We are all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Hello and welcome to Popcorn Psychology. Right off the bat, I just wanted to remind everyone, if you can, take some time out to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It really helps us be found by others. And we also just like to read your reviews, especially when they're nice. So if they could be nice, that would also be great for us. Also, you can find us at Facebook and Instagram at Popcorn Psychology, Twitter at Popcorn_Psych, and TikTok at Popcorn Psychology. So today we actually have a guest. I'm going to have her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name's Rachel Harrison. I am a therapist here in Chicago. I'm actually an art therapist. My master's is from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And I've been practicing for, over 11 years now. Started out in community mental health, working with children and families who've experienced trauma. And then I've done some work in residential programs with young adults. And now I do private practice and I see kids and adolescents and adults and try and use as much art therapy as possible in my practice. But I also do a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy and talk therapy.
All right. And she's joining us today to talk about Gone Girl. Everybody take a collective breath out because we're finally talking about Gone Girl. This is actually a request also that was made by a Patreon subscriber who, if you are a patron who subscribes for $50, you actually get to choose the movie that we talk about. And she chose Gone Girl. So this is for you. And so what is Gone Girl? Oh, I feel like everybody knows.
The scariest movie that has ever been made, ever.
Sure. So Gone Girl is about a man named Nick whose wife goes missing, quote unquote. And then he is kind of thrown under the ringer in terms of being seen publicly as the number one suspect of her murder until she gets discovered. She has actually not been killed and she's come back anew. And so we're going to be touching upon his wife, Amy. First, Amy, what's her name? Amy Dunn, or is it Amy Elliott?
Amy Dunn.
Amy Dunn. We're going to be talking about her and we're going to be touching upon cluster B, mental health diagnoses. Also, we're going to talk about identity as it pertains with her relationship with her parents. And then we're going to be talking about her husband, Nick. And we're going to touch upon a few topics, basically covering this idea that there is a correct way to behave in extraordinary circumstances, kind of the way that he's judged by the court of public opinion. So let's jump into it. So with Amy Dunn, I think my assumption is everyone who listens to this episode, what they really want to know is what is wrong with Amy, period, question mark.
What is her deal?
Yeah. What's up with her?
The simple answer to that is that this is a movie and she is a fictional character who has been created to be a monster, which is not necessarily representative of how real people behave, which is why we're talking about cluster B diagnoses today. And what that means is that personality disorders are grouped into clusters of like disorders that have overlapping symptoms that can sometimes be difficult to discern which is which. And this particular individual shows signs of cluster B, which includes antisocial, narcissistic, borderline, and histrionic personality disorders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it very much reminded me of our Fatal Attraction episode when we have a similar line of thinking around Alex, the main female character in that movie, who is also an amalgamation of mental health criteria in order to create this intense villain to scare the penises of men back into their pants. So in cluster B, And when I was watching this movie, but in this movie, I think when I was watching it, and I'm open to your guys' thoughts, obviously, is I think she on the face presents as having more antisocial personality disorder. And I think kind of her root issues, and you had talked to me about this, Ben, is presents as more borderline personality disorder. So before we get that across, I guess, would it be helpful for me to clarify those two things I just brought up?
Yes.
Yeah, do it.
It is always helpful that we need to remember that we have a general audience and not necessarily graduate educated folks who can rattle off DSM diagnoses like us. So let's cover what these diagnoses are and what their criteria are.
Well, luckily for you, Ben, I have them pulled up. So
let's see what's behind door number 1.
That would be antisocial personality disorder, which I think everyone thinks that they know. And we've done at length with James Bond, with Michael Myers. So we've definitely touched upon it. But basically, the main criteria of antisocial is as such: failure to obey laws and norms by engaging in behavior which results in criminal arrest or would warrant criminal arrest if you were caught. 2, lying, deception, and manipulation for profit or self-amusement. 3, impulsive behavior. 4, irritability and aggression manifested as frequently assaults others or engages in fighting. 5, blatantly disregards safety of self or others. 6, a pattern of irresponsibility. And 7, a lack of remorse for actions. You also have to be, for all these cluster B diagnoses, at least 18 years old. And specifically for antisocial, you also have to have demonstrated some of this stuff before the age of 15, and it would have been diagnosed as conduct disorder at that time. And this also can't be indicative of like something else like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. But I would say, well, hold up. Before I get to that, we'll also do, hold up, Ben. I feel like you're having a thought.
I got borderline up right here, so I'll just take care of that because we need to cover that too. So borderline personality disorder is another one that I like the phrase, people think that they know what it is and they mislabel people with it constantly. Borderline personality disorder contains a combination of any of the following: fear of abandonment, unstable, intense relationships, unstable self-image or sense of self, rapid mood changes, impulsive and dangerous behavior, persistent feelings of emptiness, anger management issues, and sometimes temporary paranoid thoughts. But the hallmark of it is, more particularly than anything, is there's an intense fear of abandonment and trouble regulating emotions, particularly anger. So where you can already see that these two are already starting to sound like a lot like each other with some overlap, which is why we're talking about cluster B, because all of these diagnoses have trouble regulating themselves, regulating emotions, and trouble with boundaries. It's the nuance in between them. Histrionic personality disorder is another one that is part of this group. And in that, you typically see people that are also manipulative, oftentimes are quite sexually provocative, or they tend to have this ability to engage crowds and kind of embarrass the people that they're with by their provocative behaviors. They very much work to be the center of attention to get uncomfortable when they're not, which also sounds a lot like narcissists.
And I can throw down that one. So narcissistic personality disorder, which is different than being a narcissist or people being narcissistic, is it can be similar in identity, excessive reverence to others for self-definition or self-esteem regulation, and exaggerated self-appraisal, may be inflated or deflated, or going between extremes of that. Also, your goal setting is based on gaining approval from others. Personal standards are unreasonably high in order to see oneself as exceptional, or too low based on sense of entitlement. Also, impaired ability to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others, or excessively attuned to the reactions of others, but only if perceived as relevant to self. And relationships are largely superficial or exist to serve self-esteem regulation, mutually constrained by little genuine interest in others' experience and predominance of a need for personal gain. So we did a lot of psychobabble just now. And I think, and even just hearing it out loud, Amy does have a lot of, I think she exhibits a lot of things that could fall into any of those categories. A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Definitely a sprinkling.
Yes. And then a mixing and then a matching for whatever's convenient.
And then you got a story, baby.
Right. And
You
something
got
that,
it.
I want to cover real quick is this is from the Cleveland Clinic, but it is something that I wish would have come out in the update to the DSM-5, which is the DSM-5 TR. It's a nice teal color. It just came out. I preferred the purple of the DSM-5. But anyway, some of the research is stating that nearly 75% of people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder are people assigned female at birth. Research suggests that people assigned male at birth may be equally affected by borderline personality disorder, but they may be misdiagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder or depression. Interesting. And one of the things that ongoing research is also covering is that borderline personality disorder almost never exists without chronic trauma.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so I think what's interesting in looking at Amy, would you classify her childhood as traumatic?
Her parents, man.
Because I believe that attachment trauma is a thing, the answer to that is yes. So we've had enough, I'm going to use Rachel's word here, sprinkling, to know that she has had some terrifying moments where her parents made her into a celebrity.
Yeah.
And then she had some stalkers and creeptoids who we can assume scared her, because it's scary to know that some dude out there or some girl is obsessing over you to the point that you have to engage with them in fan mail to be polite to keep them at bay, which she says in a very manipulative way in the movie talking about Desi. But I think that on its face is enough to be a traumatic event. Is it enough to cause PTSD? Depends. But it's certainly scary. But as far as attachment wise, Amy lets us know that her parents, when they created Amazing Amy, told the perfect version of her life without giving her the opportunity to process and grieve for her actual failures, like getting cut from the volleyball team or not making the orchestra. But then Amazing Amy goes on and plays varsity and takes first chair. And Amy has to live this fake reality of what life would have been like if she was successful, and essentially learns only that you gain acceptance by being perfect, which she is not. So that's going to create some attachment trauma, that I can't be who I need to be in order to please my parents and everyone else. But Amazing Amy can, but I'm not Amazing Amy.
Yeah, Ben, I agree with you. I think the attachment trauma is real. And something she says is that they stole my childhood and peddled it to the masses. All of her flaws, all of her perceived failures are just shared with the world. And I think it also comes down to this idea of being loved unconditionally. And I get the sense that Amy has never felt that she's been loved by anyone unconditionally, especially her parents.
Oh, and she's also learned that not only can I not be loved unconditionally by my parents, but only the perfect version of her was presented to the world, which means in order to maintain the brand, let's just go on ahead and assume that she could only outwardly present to the world the perfect version of herself.
Right.
And had to conceal all her failures from everyone and keep secrets, which means she would have had to form a part in order to operate in the public realm, which is dangerous because she's operating a fractured personality.
She's playing a role.
Yep.
Yeah, she's created a character. She's playing a role. She doesn't get to be her authentic self ever.
Well, I would say it would be so interesting, not to get ahead of myself, to actually encounter someone
Bingo square
with her life story in therapy. And I wonder, there's a lot of kids right now who are the center of their parents' social media platforms, who I wonder how much Amy's childhood is going to be mirrored, unfortunately, by a bunch of kids right now who are the face of the influencing on their parents' behalf. Because, go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting point that you bring up. It's like this curated childhood, this life that is what we present to everyone, but not really who we are. Yeah.
And what a head fuck that is gonna be when all these kids get more cognizant and older, and obviously what a head fuck it was for Amy, and how every book must have felt like a stab to her heart, in the sense of, you're right, that whether her parents were even fucking cognizant of it, this is me just being purely judgmental, is that I could see them being such wrapped up in their own shit people that they were just taking from their daughter's life and not even realizing that they were composing like the perfect counterpoint to what was going on in her life. Like they could just be thinking, well, Amy recently picked up the tuba, so maybe Amazing Amy will pick up the tuba, and because she's awesome and amazing, she'll be first chair or whatever the fuck. And so not even considering not even considering the impact that it'll have on their child. And also you can clearly see how in the event that they go to in the flashbacks of the movie, that her parents are shamelessly using her persona for their profit. And they are, very much, I can't remember exactly what they said, but pretty much, can you just put up on a show for us, please? Can you just kind of do your thing for us again? She's like in her 20s and she's still doing this shit for them. Like there's never an end to this for her. Amy doesn't even stop being a kid. She starts being a grown-up that's competing with her. And so you guys are all right in that she learned from a very young age, she's also an only child, that she was wrong. There's a persona, there's a version of her, a fake version, who is correct. And so I think with like the famous cool girl monologue that she says later in the movie, that does have a direct connection of, there is a version, a correct version of me, of womanhood, that if I can just fit, then everything should work out. Love should come to me. Things should work out. My partners should be reciprocal around their own, almost like fakery. And it is that sort of social psychology idea of, I've invested really heavily into this enterprise, and fuck you for not giving me return on my investment, which does not excuse her behavior, which is next level, but it does help me understand her. As much as I never thought I would say that in coming into this episode, I think really seeing how her parents used her through her whole entire life, not even stole her identity, but then stole the money that they made from her identity. If you really want to think about it like that, how could she not have this total loss of self? Because I think what common thread through all the cluster B diagnoses that we described is a difficulty with a sense of identity. And in like histrionic, narcissistic, and borderline, a lot of your identity being at the whim of the things going on around you. The sense of self is not there.
No, it is not. And as we were talking about this, I realized, you're talking about how many kids are probably going to run into this with the Instagram generation of
the TikTok
look at our
generation.
Perfect family, all of it, but social media. But we also already saw this character without the dark side in Jessica Jones. Trish Walker was this character, but less murdery.
Yeah. But
Patty
also had her own stuff going on. If anyone here's watched Jessica Jones,
she did, and for the same reasons. They're essentially the same character, and like but one is more well-adjusted than the other, but both are struggling with the same kind of thing where they have conflicting sense of identity and loyalty to myself, loyalty to my family, and loyalty to the brand. And because all of those get intertwined, it gets really confusing which one is my identity and which one represents my survival. And once we get something that crossed, I think seeing symptoms of borderline personality disorder start to emerge, start to make sense. And probably why we see child stars have such a hard time in adulthood, and why so many of them have quite a few problems, including substance abuse and inability to behave in a perceived normal way and to interact with the human beings in a normal way. It's so different for them that their whole world has been different. And we see the effect of this play out in a monstrous way in Amy.
Yeah, I mean, she really did. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Rachel.
She really did have to take on this sort of maladaptive behavior in order to cope with her parents and her childhood. And I mean, I really do. I like this movie. enjoy it. But watching it, then trying to think about coming onto this podcast and like from my therapeutic lens, I did find myself having empathy for her. Now she goes way out of control, but really thinking about, being a kid and growing up with these parents and being an only child. I mean, I can see why she had to do the things that she did because she was trying to get her needs met.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And that is the baseline for everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead.
Behavior.
Anna.
Part of what I was thinking about with Amy is that when kids experience trauma when they're growing up, a lot of what they try to do is make sense out of what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes that's how narratives, stories, parts get developed because of that. And one of the things that Amy doesn't have to do that other kids have to do is connect the dots and try and make it make sense. She doesn't have to try and make it make sense. The character in the books that her parents write on a regular basis does all the things that she can't do. She doesn't have to imagine or figure out, oh, like, what am I doing wrong? Or like, why is my mom upset at me? It's like, oh, this other person does all the things that I can't do. It's that black and white. So also, if we think about somebody coming from this situation, it's going to be really hard for them to not think in a rigid way because that's how their world has been created, in which she does something and then she is an example of somebody who does something who's named after her, who does it better than she does every single time. So when you have that comparison up against each other, even if we look at the development of the different changes of the way that kids understand the world based on their development of their brain at that time and their identities and all of those other pieces, is that if you have this thing that's comparing you and you are found to be less than in every way that you can be, and not only do your parents know about it, but the whole fucking world knows about it, be really hard to be able to develop and understand relationally with the world, even just based on that. And we already know that the connection for her is already different anyway, because she's been like, this is never anything she gave consent for. This is something her parents took from her. This is a situation when I think about kids that I work with or people that I work with who are traumatized as kids, none of it was in their control. So again, so we have the attachment wound, which is what all three of you have kind of been talking about. And then we also have this just like straight, rigid, black and white, amazing Amy's better than me. And having parents, and my parents are the ones who are writing the book, which means they must also believe that amazing Amy is better than me. So regardless of everything else, having to hold those two thoughts at the same time as a kid, any kid would come out being confused and having a hard time understanding what it means when someone says something to you and whether or not that's something that are they lying? Because their parents are probably saying nice things. So again, like when we think about, whenever we talk about people who have cluster B in real life and not this movie version that we've been talking about, is they are in a lot of pain. It is chaotic to be inside their brains and inside their bodies, because a lot of everything that they're experiencing, they need the external validation in order for them to feel okay on the inside. It's so chaotic. And I think it makes a shit ton of sense, Ben, what you brought up about the Cleveland Clinic, talking about the difference in terms of the way that people, what their gender is or what their assignment at birth is. I think that makes a lot of sense because we know just in general.
Yeah, and that men are more likely to be diagnosed with antisocial, and that there's, kind of the same flip-flop is that the statistics are probably off on how many people representatively have that versus who is diagnosed with it. And there's a lot of importance in understanding that responsible diagnosis does not happen because someone says so. It happens when it's evaluated, assessed, dialed in, and looked at through all of the lenses available of someone's social status, development, and parenting style, because you have to factor in who someone is demographically, but also how that they were raised before you start assigning diagnoses to people.
Yeah, because if I thought of the book version of Amy as like a sibling she was being constantly compared to, that would feel more like straightforward emotional abuse by her parents. Then I think when I first watched this, I've only seen the movie twice. When I first watched it when it first came out, because I had read the book and I was a pretty green therapist still. And I think I was very like, what is she bitching about with these books? Like, it's not that big a deal. Like, I really remember minimizing it myself.
Yeah.
Probably because I already didn't like her because I'd read the book. And now watching it with the eyes of a therapist, I was like, this is some fuck shit. Like, I get why she carries around perhaps a lot of rage. The things that she does in the movie to get quote unquote justice, like spitting in that girl's Mountain Dew, all the things she's done to her past partners and her current husband, I think all comes from this place of, I would have to imagine like intense like sometimes impulsive, like the spitting in the drink, but also just like this low level rage that must be going on inside of her all the time. I do think it's interesting, but I don't want to get on a sidebar, that it doesn't seem like she's ever really done anything to her parents except for, I guess, go missing as an adult and letting them think that she's dead, which is a pretty big deal. But it does make me curious if there was anything she was doing as a kid that her parents were just not aware of or they minimized. It's just interesting that none of this stuff that we hear of when they're kind of peeking into her backstory is never like directed at her parents, which does happen though. Like kids will do, I don't know. I don't know. Where I'm going with that is basically like, I could see her maybe not doing it to her parents because she's still trying to gain their positive regard and maybe acting out in other ways, like sexual partners or romantic partners.
Well, even as an adult, when her parents come to her, I think she and Nick had both lost their jobs and they say, we need to borrow money from your trust fund. And she, agrees to that. I think she's constantly all her life been, trying to get their love and approval. Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. I think Amy has a anxious, preoccupied attachment style. I think that she is very much afraid of letting people get close to her will make her vulnerable, and that she wants to earn their love and will go through great lengths to do it, but is always constantly unsure that she will get consistent love back from what she does unless she's perfect.
Right.
Which, like how Hannah said, is how parts start to develop. And Brittany, I think you're onto something. I've been thinking about it and just looking for a place to put it. Is I guarantee you, in my headcanon, this happened, is that her part of her that protects her developed a little devious shithead that did little things like stole shit and fucked with crew members of whatever they were going on, and bullied other kids. She did little things as she kind of developed into who she became that were warning signs that as she was trying to take back control from the world, she was experimenting with not being perfect and seeing what it would feel like to be quite the opposite of amazing Amy. And that developed its own part, which is the one we see develop and watch her switch into when we see her with Desi. She switches in and out of what she needs to do. I guarantee you there is dissociation going on with this person.
Well, the way that she's able to hurt herself, I would imagine she can kind of be a little separate from her body. Because she really harms herself in this movie. I mean, in a very like ends justify the means kind of thinking, but she brutalizes herself. And it's a movie version of a person. So they're trying to really pump up the antisocial part of her by having her just like blank face. But you could argue that is she like just dissociating? And is that something she learned to do? She feels like a kid that's really, really smart that was left alone a lot as well. And probably got into adult stuff at an early age because no one was paying attention to her. I wouldn't be surprised if she also has a good amount of neglect, either like she was on the little platform for her parents to play with and make money off of, or she was kind of left to her own devices amongst a lot of New York intellectuals. That's my headcanon for her.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think the closest we get to ever really seeing like the real Amy is when she leaves and she's basically running away before she meets back up with Desi. And she's kind of just eating junk food and doing her own thing. And she's not occupied with her appearance or anything like that, or trying to pretend to be something. She is. She pretends to be a victim of domestic violence and has that terrible Nolans accent.
I was going to ask Rachel, so you're an actual New Orleans resident, correct?
Well, yeah, I'm from there. Yeah.
Do you speak like that?
Well, you're hearing my voice right now, and it's not. Hello.
You're not just drawling.
I'm from Nolans. Yeah, no, I mean that accent she puts on is like truly offensive and not good at all. I mean, so she is playing a role, but I also think it's not necessarily to get approval from other people. It's to blend in. And I think it's more she wants to disappear. I think she wants to be invisible.
Mm-hmm.
But then it ties into kind of the same theory that we're all working off of here, is that I think you're right. We see the most authentic her when she's driving that little shit car, like, doing whatever she wants, like cutting her hair, dyeing it a different color, like not looking like Amazing Amy. We see her free for the first time, but then she's not perfect and somebody discovers her and they beat her ass. And she learns right away that if I'm not perfect, I am unsafe.
Yeah.
Which she didn't learn that. Let me rephrase. She has that reinforced, which has always been her fear because has an anxious attachment. She has learned that if I am not perfect, I am not loved. And then we see parts develop yet again.
Well, and it's also if I'm not completely in control in all moments of everything, right? Of the people, of the situation. So she always has to have that control. She let her guard down a bit too much. She got a little too comfortable.
Made real friends, sort of.
Yeah, sort of.
Well, I think that's the most authentic she actually presents in terms of trying to create friendships. The only friendships really the only other friendship we see her cultivate in that movie is with who she refers to as the idiot.
The pregnant idiot. Yeah.
And that's for her own nefarious devices. But I think going back to what you said, Hannah, and you can clarify this too, is that I think what you were speaking to is also this idea that you get locked into very rigid thinking. And when we when we were talking about a few of these diagnoses, extremes is brought up a lot. Mm-hmm. And it is this idea that we're all talking about, which I'm either perfect, I'm the cool girl, or I get to finally relax and eat what I want. Like I'm either like fully in control of this relationship, or it's all going to go to hell, or I'm unsafe, or like I have to be perfect, or I'm garbage. And that's where I can like gain the empathy as well that we've been talking about, is that such a hard way to live, because you don't have any wiggle room to make mistakes, to be messy, whatever that means to you. The whole middle spectrum that is actual where life occurs and where people actually are does not exist when you're in these states. And it's such an exhaustive way to live, to have to evaluate everything by extremes. And I see, like, when I work with clients who have more cluster B presentations, I see that distress, of trying to figure out what's going on, figure out other people, figure out what box they fit into. And in reality, people don't fit into boxes. And that's just so genuinely confusing. And you see that with her in the way that she flips on her ex, Tom, the way that she flips on Nick, is that once they are not complying with the person that she needs them to be, or that she deserves for them to be, they are the enemy and they deserve to be destroyed. Not just break up with them, fuck them. They need to be destroyed. They need to be ruined down to the ground.
Torn to shreds.
Yeah, because
you are a threat. And if you are a threat, I'm going to destroy you.
Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting line she says with the cool girl monologue. I think she says, let me look at my notes. I forged the man of my dreams, and he did not meet me where I was at. And so she is operating also in that extremes idea of everyone's living a persona, an extremes-based persona. And so I've done my part. He's supposed to do his part. Now he's cheating on me. Fuck him. And also the thing she says of he actually thought I would love him unconditionally, which I just wanted to add to back up what you said, Rachel, about she was born under this idea that love is conditional. And so why wouldn't she think he's a idiot for thinking that that she would love him even if he was a slob, even if he was a cheater, even if he was not doing his end of the bargain.
Yeah, that's exactly it. He didn't hold up his end of the deal.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then that poor Tom guy wouldn't wear those ties. Achi machi.
Yeah.
Well, and with Nick not holding up the end of the deal, like looking at how all these things start to tie together, Nick cheating on her breaks the veneer that her marriage is perfect and that they're doing everything right and that she married the super handsome Batman and kept
nice one.
You see that? Just slid that right in. That she married the super handsome guy with the butt chin, and then worked on developing these careers. And then all of a sudden, the deal is all broken. They don't have their New York brownstone anymore. They don't have the high society life. They're not living an image in which she feels safe. They're in the middle of Missouri, living in a big house, but unemployed. Nick is working as a, community college professor?
I was going to say a drunk. But.
And a bar owner. He's a bar owner and a community college professor.
You might have missed it. Hannah, what did you say his job was?
Being a drunk.
I'm sorry, did you say his job was being Batman? Because that's what I thought it was.
Oh my goodness gracious. And I think that there is genuine, like trying to really view Amy as a whole person, not just as a two-dimensional movie villain. There is a lot to be said for what she's going through, that she was displaced, from the lifestyle she's used to. She was put into this town, that there was a lot that she thought her life was going to look like that has changed and doesn't seem to be really discussed, in the sense that the reason why they moved is no longer applicable. His mom passed away and now it seems like they're just there now.
Well, and I think she says something along the lines of like, I didn't mind, but I wished he would have asked me, something like that. I mean, this couple really does not have open communication or, they don't make decisions together. They don't talk about where they're at. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I guess also something to note. Oh, go ahead, Hannah.
Well, what I was going to say is that, so you also see she does the same thing to him when her parents ask her for money. She doesn't ask him. She just says yes. So they have no interest in sharing decisions with each other. They don't, and they certainly aren't communicating about anything. I mean, I think they are pretty clueless. I feel like, which I know we're going to talk about Nick next, but the way that he has a hard time answering questions. Mm-hmm. And that feels, and part of the reason why that feels genuine is because I don't think they fucking talk to each other. I think
think about the baby stuff.
Yeah. Like
they're not on the same page.
Not only are they not on the same page, but like, I don't think they talk to each other about anything. And at the very least, based on the information that we get, is that it's at least been a year of having a relationship where they're not communicating in any meaningful way. Whether or not that's been a lasting part of their relationship, we're not sure of.
Mm-hmm.
I think that where this ties together is that looking at borderline personality disorder, being in a state where you all of a sudden are devalued, you already devalue yourself, you already struggle to know where you fit. And as soon as they moved out of this place where they were together, living this dream, and back in Missouri, Amy was no longer the top of Nick's world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. To share him
with his mom, his sister,
the bar.
Right. All of those things. And we see with people that have borderline personality disorder, once they detect a threat to their status that makes them question themselves, that is when the intense anger and the temporary paranoia that we mentioned earlier starts to show its face. And where the arguments that, we see this cluster B character, right? We talked about how there's all four of these diagnoses. Like, yes, it would be consistent with a person who has narcissistic personality disorder to also get really unstable when they feel like they're losing control of everyone's adulation. Like, we have never had a better example more thrust into our purview than Donald Trump being president for 4 years, which yet again, reviewer, we don't support that man. Just to be clear, reviewer. But with looking at people that have that particular diagnosis where you can see things start to get amalgamated, is that for people who have narcissistic personality disorder, they fiercely need to hold on to being the top dog, being the person who gets viewed as the best all the time. And it's not always well supported. So when there's cracks in that veneer, they start to fight, they start to throw insults, they start to get destabilized, they get very angry. And we saw that in Trump over and over and over again, that the more people poked holes in the veneer of who he is, the more intensely angry he got and irrational he got. We don't see that from Amy. Amy doesn't need to be the top. Amy needs to be the most important to Nick, to whoever she's with. And that makes the argument for her more borderline than anything else to me.
Yeah.
And then I think the crux of the episode, the crux of it, which is her scheming self, that to me is where the movie, similar like when we talked about Fatal Attraction, I think that's where the movie becomes more plot driven and less like making sense about how a real human being would be. Because I think that's where also she presents more antisocial, the way that she's so like calculated and almost flat, constricted in her affect or switching her affect, the more like the lying sort of deception, manipulation, treating people like pawns, like the idiot neighbor that she makes friends with just to use her as a alibi basically later, or like a story. And the way that she keeps Desi on the hook for 20 years ish in order to just have him in her back pocket in case she needs him. And so all that sort of calculated self, I don't know if I would really see that in a person with these other cluster B diagnoses we're talking about, because there's a level of, in my experience, which could be different, and I'm, open to being called out, is there's a more like emotional dysregulation and scatteredness. And she's so calculated, but that could also be, she's very intelligent, I'm assuming, based on her actions in the movie. And that could be also part of her upbringing kind of coming up too, of like learning how to be more methodical.
I agree. I think that people that I've worked with, which I've worked with several, me and Rachel actually have worked at the same place in different years. But that place, at least when I was there, had quite a few teens with borderline personality disorder, both male and female. And the things that I would see mirror what you're saying, Brittany, is that the tendency for borderline personality disorder is that when people feel that personality destabilization, whether it's from internal or external sources, or something external validates the internal dysregulation, is when you see the intense behaviors. That is when you see the anger towards self or towards others. And that is when you see the hopelessness and then the rage that results in self-injury, and then the emotional manipulation to either get attention back on themselves by causing injury to themselves, and that resulting in people flocking to them, and then they get all the attention. Not to invalidate the pain that they feel, but that that's what makes it the personality disorder, is that there's complicated mental capacities going on behind it, that it's not just to take out their anger on themselves, it's also to replace the need of feeling unstable and unvaluable and then getting value restored through attention. And that only happens when there's intense dysregulation, as opposed to antisocial, who doesn't give a shit about whether people like them or not.
Yeah.
Amy very much does. And I think I agree. Like, that's where movie magic goes. Like, is this a presentation of antisocial? It depends on which scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it just takes it back to the sprinkling, really. How they really just threw everything at Amy. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. I think, like, this makes me think of two things. One is, why didn't she never in any part of the movie goes after Nick's girlfriend, the girl that he has the affair with? And that's like, if that would make me think more antisocial, if she was really calculating and like, I'm going to take this girl down too. So I think that's like, I would expect that, right, of her if we were leaning that way. But she, again, going back to what Ben said, she really only cares about what Nick thinks and that Nick gets her. And it's not about anyone else.
No, it's not. It's about her being seen as the most important person in his world. And because she's attached herself to him, when he slights her, when he invalidates her, when he hurts her, game on.
Yeah. And then she comes back because he proves to her that he really sees who she is, that he knows her, that he gets her, that they are, what she sees is like, we're the same. You get me, right? You said all of the right things. And that's why she comes back.
Yeah, her watching that TV to see his interview, especially when he was talking to the camera, when that one TV host asked him to talk to the camera, she could not draw herself away from that, despite what was going on with Desi and his weird manipulation. But looking at that, to me, was like, that is super, super duper a borderline trait that someone would do, is that I caused this chaos and now I'm going to fixate and watch him get it right. And that's going to draw me back in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think someone with more antisocial presentation would just go scorched earth in the sense of, I have decided that you are not in my life anymore. You don't mean anything to me. Maybe I'll leave a path of destruction you have to clean up. And I'm bouncing. I've forgotten about you the second I've left you. And her, like, you're right, hyperfixation on him. When I work with clients who struggle with that, and that sort of like over attachment towards other people's behaviors, I do a lot of work about, well, basically the way I spit in their soup, as we sometimes say, is I go, wow, this person really has a lot of power over you.
Yeah.
And then they don't like hearing that. Then they're like, what? This piece of trash I've been bitching about for 8 sessions? I'm like, and you've been bitching about them for 8 sessions. Like, they can't be a huge asshole, but then also the only thing you ever think about. Well, not so much like trying to make fun of them, but it's more trying to recalibrate for them. Like, how does it feel that someone outside of you has so much weight over how you feel internally? And do you want to, that's the way I kind of can find it in sometimes, to sort of start changing things around. Like, do you want the power to lie within you? And if you do, I can help you with that. And then part of what you have to radically accept is moving past this person, not necessarily what they did to you, because we can definitely process that, but still being really wrapped up in like all the news she's watching about him and wanting to talk about him. And her identity is still, whether she likes it or not, wrapped up in how he's doing.
Yep. Which is, there's the sprinkle again. That would be more narcissistic / borderline than it would be histrionic or antisocial, because someone who with histrionic is going to buy themselves a new super sexy or super flashy outfit and go get attention from somebody else.
Yeah.
And an antisocial person is maybe not going to care. Whereas the narcissistic person will either do exactly what you said, Brittany, where they will drop them. They will never look back. They might give them a little sprinkling of attention and then pull back. Because one of the things that people who have dated people with narcissistic personality disorder talk about is the intense valuation and then devaluation that happens very quickly, that I refer to as pump and dump. They pump you up full of compliments and they dump you. They that came from my wife going out when she was breastfeeding, not whatever direction you're taking it in your nasty little head there, Brittany. But
I wasn't the one making a face. How dare
you absolutely were making a face.
So I think we have thoroughly done our best to try to solve the mystery that is Amy. Is there anything else that we want to say about Amy before we move on?
She is cluster B. You cannot pick one of these diagnoses and be representing an accurate depiction. I just want to sum that up because I've read so many articles around where one psychiatrist said, "Oh no, she's definitely antisocial, and she's definitely this, she's definitely that." Nope,
she's definitely made up.
She's definitely amazing. She's amazing, Amy.
Amazing in the truest sense of the word, where that's amazes me that you did that. That's neither positive or negative. And I would like to also caveat, which I think we do, but we haven't really said maybe in a while, and we said this a lot in Fatal Attraction, is that real people have these diagnoses. So be mindful of how you talk about them. I've also had to say this on our TikTok page too. These are real people. Just because you know a little bit more about borderline or these other personality disorders by listening to us, don't start talking about it like these aren't real people who are in, like we've said, deep pain most of the time. And just trying, like you said, Hannah, getting their needs met, but unfortunately going about it in a way that's not quite working or that is part of social norms, so they're not getting that reciprocal understanding from others.
Or is based on norms that existed in a time that does not exist anymore, but because those are the skills that they have, they cannot apply them to a changed situation, and therefore distress and needs are not met.
It's how they've learned to cope with the situations that they're in. And I think we focused a lot on the behavior, which is behavior that isn't acceptable and we don't like. And but we forget that, they're still people, and a lot of times it's coming from a place of hurt.
Yeah, especially in the wake of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, not to date this episode, but people have been throwing around borderline and what it looks like and what it means and how if you have this and you can't really be abused. People are saying hellacious, dumb shit. Also, those people are movie stars. They also aren't real people to us. And the fact that we will never know really who they are, the same way we will never know who Jack Sparrow really is. So this is just a PSA to everybody out there who's also mouthing off about these diagnoses because they think they know what's going on.
Yeah.
These are real people, not just like monsters with these names. Anywho, so we'll cut to a break. Okay, so Nick, punchable face Nick is our next topic. So Nick Dunn is what makes I think this book also so interesting and how in the movie is how it examines both the court of public opinion and also this idea that is also a rigid idea, which is that either you're a likable person or you're an unlikable person. And if people have decided you're unlikable, that you must be capable of almost anything.
Murder.
Yes.
One must be completely unlikable to be capable of murder, just like Ted Bundy, right?
Yeah. And how like judged she is. I think a quote I wrote down is like, after Amy's been missing for several days, his twin sister says, "You look like hammered shit," as if he shouldn't look like hammered shit. And I literally wrote in my notes, shouldn't he? His wife has been missing. Like, shouldn't he look like absolute trash? It's like, no matter what he does, it's never going to be good enough, which I think goes down to this idea that for whatever reason, a lot of us have, at least in Western society, which is the one that I live in, that there's a correct way to perform human situations and that we all like got this manual at some point in our lives that explains how you're supposed to be at a funeral, how you're supposed to be during a car accident, how you're supposed to be when your wife goes missing. And that if you aren't acting according to that secret manual that we all think we're holding in our heads, then something must be wrong with you. And we need to figure out what that is.
Yeah, it's a shame that the only people that get that manual are the creeptoids that follow the creeptoid playbook, because they all follow the same. I know you've all seen it as therapists, like everybody encounters the same creeps and they all have the same moves for manipulating and lying and deceiving other humans. It's ridiculous that we see such expectations that Nick be so very many things and yet again don't take into consideration his life. Nick is someone who is operating in chronic hypoarousal. Nick is depressed. He is down. He has gone through the loss of his mother. Things aren't going well in his marriage. He's moved out of New York and now back to living a simpler life that he does not want to be living in the middle of Missouri in his hometown, but married this beautiful, successful woman and is supposed to have been all these things and was, and now had all of that taken away from him when they lost their jobs. So Nick is chronically hypoaroused. He's not in a part of his personality where he has a whole lot of being in touch with normal ranges of emotions and anxieties and things that would drive him to respond to a dangerous situation. He is out of touch with all that because everything sucks. So why should I care? And the way he's being examined is completely unfair to that reality that people that are grieving, people that are in situations like that, people are in bad marriages where everything sucks, my life sucks, I can't win. They enter a freeze part of themselves and a fawn part, which is the hypoaroused defense mechanisms we have. Hyper-aroused ones are fight and flight, hypo-aroused are freeze and fawn. And he is very much freeze and fawn with the world of, I'm going to do the exact bare minimum that gets my job done, that gets me paid, and I'm going to go drink and do nothing. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to care because I can't win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he's going to fuck a 24-year-old while he's at it.
I mean, he's got some real blurred lines going on there.
Yeah. Well, the fawn response is interesting. You're right, because the smiling next to her missing poster, the taking a photo with that woman who asked for a selfie, that woman is the one who's wrong in that situation.
100%.
The trying, like giving the guy donuts, like the way that Amy's mom shits on him at that headquarters that they made up. And she's like, you're going around like, basically everyone is treating him as if he's either a total scumbag, and when he's being nice, he's performing being nice.
Yeah. And I think he says something like, I'm just trying to be a polite, considerate gentleman. Like that's how I was raised. And I'm trying to, thank these people that are coming out to help Amy. But he can do nothing right. He's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. And I think he knows that. I mean, I think he already, like I said, he's already so hypo-aroused that he is kind of shut down and disconnected.
Mm-hmm. I don't think he likes himself very much. I think in the book, he's the one who describes himself as having a punchable face.
Yeah. I think he's seeing himself a lot. And even when that woman takes the selfie, he automatically realizes, oh, this is not a good look. People are going to judge this. Can you please delete it? And she's like, don't touch me.
Yeah, and she's the one who's not acting correctly according to social norms.
That's horrible.
And the piece that when he says, my parents raised me to be polite, there is a Midwestern politeness where we go into, this natural process of like, how are you? Like, I'm doing well. Can I get you anything to drink? When you smile in pictures, there's a lot of unspoken rules there in terms of how we interact with the world. And we see it. Not only, we definitely see it in the movie with Nick in terms of them judging what he is, but even when we think about any situation where somebody's had a traumatic experience, we see the media do the same thing to real human people as well. Like this also isn't a piece of the film. It's like, oh, I don't know what this is like. No, like shit like this happens on a regular basis, where people are put into one box or the other by the media, which is a part of why we do the podcast. And I feel like and I read the book. So also like when I saw the movie, it really felt like, even though he was really hard to remember, that he wasn't the way that I was viewing him through the story that she was telling, instead of what his experience actually was like. And I think they do that really well in the film when they talk about it the way that they do and make him seem like he's this bad guy because he's smiling in front of a picture of his wife or because he's whatever. And it's like, we don't know how people are going to react when things don't go the way that they expected, or where a tragedy happens to them and they have absolutely no idea what's going on, or maybe can even be present in the world where the thing is still happening to them. there's so many pieces of this, and that's again, the media, the way that they portray it, or the way that they make it seem, and the magical response that we're like, that he's supposed to be able to act a certain way, or that he shouldn't be smiling ever because you can't be happy and be sad, can't have the complicated experience of being human in terms of emotion. And I think that's what they really strip that away. And it's very feels very accurate to what I feel like happens to people when they are in a situation like this in real life.
You see the culture clash, right? Like you see he's dealing with New Yorkers who have a totally different culture than someone from Missouri.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's a great point in terms of when Amy's mom shits on him, that she also might be missing that part. And she backs down pretty quickly. Like as soon as he challenges her, like stands up for himself, she does say, you're right. And that could also be, she's also going through a very weird time. And so also when you're going through a very weird time that's emotionally wrought, you can also be not the best version of yourself, in that you can kind of lash out and be mad. Because when you also
you have a fight part that engages when you're scared and angry?
Yeah. And so I think also what's hard about these kind of situations too is that for the people in distress, like Amy's parents, if I'm going to, cut them the benefit of the doubt, is that you want things to make sense. And so also you start putting things in boxes too. And I think what you were bringing up, Hannah, what made me think is that we keep things in categories in our heads. They're called schemas. Like this is the way you behave during this, and this is what happens after that. And so they're judging Nick based on very understandable schemas that we all have. When someone takes a picture of you, you smile. When someone asks for something, you do this. Like he's operating within the schemas that under regular circumstances, he would be behaving correctly. And because they have decided something about him, they're viewing it in a very different way, which I think brings up a great point, which we've talked about before, which is cognitive dissonance versus confirmation bias. They're not necessarily counterpoints to each other, even though I think of them that way. And what it basically is confirmation bias. I think people are pretty aware of, which is this idea that once you decide something about something, once you have a bias towards something, you look for things that confirm that bias. I think we see that very clearly with not the detective, but I don't know if he's the detective too, but the cop working with her, the male presenting cop, he has decided he does not like Nick from jump, and therefore Nick must be a murderer. Even the female presenting cop, she's like, well, he could just be this, or he could just be that. And he's like, no, he sucks, or he hates his wife, or he should be doing this, he should be doing that. There's no shoulds when it comes to crisis. Cops should know better. The cops in this movie should know better. And I think something I talk about in more real world circumstances is when a death occurs and I process with someone through grief, is there's a lot of judgment around shoulds there of like, I should behave like this, or I should be more upset, or why haven't I cried? And I would be shocked if there's not a version of that going through Nick's head of I should be doing this, I should be doing that, but I'm not. So what's up with me? And then maybe it's because of this. And you get in your head about it. And what I usually tell people is, just let it be whatever it's going to be, whatever feelings come up for you, just try to be present with that. I think what is different about this situation, obviously, is that he's being observed the whole time. And as we know from taking Psych 101, when you know you're being observed, you also act very weird, or you just don't act like yourself. And so that's also a layer that no one's thinking about when it comes to why he's acting the way he's acting. He's being observed publicly. He's being judged publicly in a crazy circumstance that no one ever prepares you for. And there's also mixed up feelings, which also goes back to this idea when we talked about rigid thinking. An opposing idea of rigid thinking is dialectical thinking, which is this idea of holding two or more thoughts at once that can feel mildly contradictory. So, he can be scared for his wife and be helping someone get donuts from the craft table. He can be cheating on his wife and not capable of murdering her. He can be maybe a true real asshole and, still be a good person in different ways. And so dialectical thinking brings about cognitive dissonance, which is this uncomfortable feeling we get when we receive data that goes against our confirmation bias. And so what I also tell people is you have to be comfortable with that discomfort of getting more flexible in your thinking. That contradictory things that seem contradictory can be true. And he is just a victim of people rigidly thinking of him, confirmation bias, and just deciding who he is from jump.
Right. And remembering that cognitive dissonance results in you saying and doing things that don't match.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that all over Nick, but also, Hannah and I have brought up parts and do it a lot. Parts are essentially like we all carry these lovely phones with us that have a whole bunch of base technology in them that you have to install apps to engage different functions, but they all run out of the same base hardware and software out of Apple iOS or Android. And you have to install a bunch of different apps to make that do different things. Well, we have different apps that are responsible for different functions that our personality can do. And different apps run at different times. And sometimes they run at the same time. For Nick has to run a bunch of different apps all at once. He has to run his defense app because people are accusing him of fucking murdering his wife, which he knows he did not do, which puts him in defense. He has to run, I am actually running a covert secret life because I'm unhappy and miserable, and instead I'm going to sleep with this beautiful college student who does make me feel good and makes me feel like I'm important, but I got to keep that a secret from everyone, especially right now, or that's going to go bad. So he's defending that and trying to isolate that. He's trying to run all of these different things where he's being the nice guy, but he also wants everyone to get out of his face so he can sit and process what the fuck is happening. And he's got people on his face all the time. So he's running all of these different scripts that are countering, and he doesn't know kind of which part of him to operate at which time. Like, do I need to attach to people here? Do I need to defend myself? Do I need to fight people and tell them to get the fuck away from me? Do I need to just shut down and shrivel away out of everyone's existence? And you see when Tyler Perry tells him, don't show your face, you see him go like, got it.
Thank God someone's telling me what to do.
But also, I have a script for that. I have an app for that.
Well, and I think it's also part of what we're forgetting is that like he knows that Amy set him up, right? So he's supposed to be looking like this grieving husband who has this missing wife, but he also knows that Amy planned all of this, right? And she's doing this to punish him for having this affair. And so he's really trying to put on this show, right? And really aware of what it looks like to other people, and also has probably a lot of feelings about what Amy's done and what that means, and, not knowing really what's happened to her or where she is.
But right, look how much different he gets once he knows that's the game, because then he knows what to do. Like once he realizes what game he is playing, he knows what app to run, and then he starts doing it. And he changes, because then instead of like being in that spot, when he's in the hotel, not knowing who he's supposed to be and what he's supposed to do, and you see him have that conflict with the woman and the conflict with the parents and all of those things that we've talked about. Once he understands the game that he is playing, they're like, this bitch is setting me up.
Yeah.
She knows what I did. She knows I cheated. I know Amy and I know what she's doing. And once he figures that out, then he's playing chess with her. And instead of like playing checkers and realizing you're playing chess, he like, okay, I know what to do now. And he starts playing her game.
And he says to Tyler Perry, like, no, I can do this. Like, I can put on the show with the reporter, even after the girl he's been having the affair with comes out dressed like a babysitter and and they're like, oh, we're calling this interview. And he's like, no, I got this. I can do this.
And he does. And that's when he taps into the resources he has, because he taps right into his Midwesternness. He goes, nope, you know what? I'm going to be likable. I'm going to be shameful. I'm going to be penitent. I'm going to show all of the Midwestern values. I am going to ignore everyone's advice who's coming at me from the East Coast and from other places that don't resonate with my people. And I'm going to be what my people expect of me right now, because I know how to play this game. And it's me.
Yeah.
And he does that. And that is, I think, in the most authentic we see him, even though he's playing game, but Nick is deeply ashamed. He wasn't lying. That's why it worked. And as soon as he can get in touch with those feelings and get unfrozen and go, defense mechanisms need to work here or I'm going to be in jail for the rest of my life, he starts playing the game and winning.
And it works so well that Amy changes her plan and decides to come back.
Well, she gets a big old Desi-sized dent in her plan that then she has to, She has to work her way out of that. But yeah. I mean, I think he does a great job of shifting into that. And also, it's that interesting thing of my wife's gone missing and I was going to ask her for a divorce. Like, there's no schema for that. Then what's the adequate amount of upset I have to be around a marriage that I was already 80% out the door of, if not 99?
Right. And now that people think I was going to murder my wife, like, I absolutely can't tell them that.
Yeah.
Because Nick is not dumb.
No.
He's shut down. He is not stupid. And when you see him kind of engage, it's like he taps into that ability to access his flow state and go like, okay, I'm going to let my right brain do what it's supposed to do here. I'm not going to be overthinking this. I'm not going to be thinking there's a way I'm supposed to behave and trying to play the game other people want me to play. I'm going to do what feels natural and operate authentically and trust that I'm going to make the right decisions. And that's going to be that. And you see his anxiety drop tremendously once he does that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think too, and I don't know, I feel like he also has somebody he has a couple people who believe him and who can see it for the way that he can see it. And I think that makes a big difference too. I think that has a big effect on his being able to manage his anxiety where he's not alone in the situation anymore. And he has something that makes, a little bit of sense, right? Which, as we know, that changes things always for people. But I think other than that, for Nick, I don't know that he necessarily has any kind of diagnosis. Like, I think he's a guy who's unhappy in his marriage and had an affair, which is not uncommon to happen for either partner in a relationship. And that I think the part that we see of him where he is excited by Amy, or that's how people, I think, perceive him to be. I think he's just as trapped as he's always been, and again, being stuck and being trapped and having to play a part that he never wanted to have to keep playing.
Yeah. We haven't even touched on how this movie ends you're right in that when he sees his sister who's despondent over the idea of him staying with her, he does say, I can do it. I can be this person for this kid until the kid's 18, until one of us dies. And, whatever that means to him is he does present as sort of confident-ish that he can take on, like, sure of himself, that he can take on that role in Amy and this child's life. Yeah,
that's going to go bad. Like, they're going to resent each other. Like, Amy's going to be constantly controlling him and he's going to constantly resent her. They're going to go back and forth. That's going to go so bad.
They're going to play the game against each other. Ooh.
Amy is a mother.
Ugly stuff.
And the way that she's shown in the movie is,
it's scary.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Hannah. Were you going to say something?
Just that I think the way that he is villainized in the first half of the film, and then we get to see something else that happens. I think it's just really, I think it's helpful to show what is different in terms of his, once he feels more connected, once he's in control, in the same way that's why Amy does all those small things that she does, because she wants to be in control of things. And so once he has a little bit more control, he's able to I think, reconnect to himself, but also, like Ben, like you said, able to kind of turn down the volume on all of his other parts that are trying to keep him alive, keeping him surviving through the situation that he's currently experiencing. And there was a part where his sister is giving him a hard time, and you can just see the look on his face is like, I can't pretend in front of you two. Like, it's been rough. This has all been very rough, and I can't. And I know that you want to feel connected to me, and I just don't have it right now. Because that was before.
I was just saying, he almost broke when she was going to ask him if he killed her. Like, when he didn't have her support, he almost broke.
Yeah. It's like, I can't. Well, and also when we're in a situation like that, where all this weird information is coming up and everything's starting to line up, and it's like, what are you even talking about? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And then the person who has always been on your side for your whole life is like, did you do this, bro? Like, and that's where they are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really goes to show what Brittany said about having supports in a situation like this, having people that believe you and know you, and that makes so much of a difference, and having that support system.
And one thing we aren't really privy to in how this story is told is he makes references here and there to how Amy was-ish in their marriage towards the end, but we don't ever really see what that looked like. We don't really know how Amy was the last several years of their marriage. All that we are privy to is her version that fits her narrative of him being an abusive husband. And so it would be interesting in getting a better sense of Nick, because he kind of makes insinuations that she's like mean or cruel or cutting or just really making it hard for him to breathe kind of at home. And we don't ever get to really see what that looks like, because that part of the story we see purely from Amy's unreliable narrator. But I think that's also a good point when you do couples therapy in a general sense, is that you never really know. All you ever get is both parts of the relationship, their perception of the relationship and how it impacts them. And there could be a reality in which her version is the way that she really perceived it and his version is the way he really perceived it. And it's in direct, almost opposition to each other.
Wow. I think that happens all the time in couples that I see. And the largest gap in whether or not they're going to succeed is if they can recognize that no matter what, they think about the other person's feelings and the other person's reality, and whether they think it's valid or not. The person who's having the feeling is always going to think their feeling and their interpretation is valid. And if the other partner invalidates it constantly, they will continue to fight because the other person is just fighting for being heard. Mm-hmm. And with these two, I think that is probably been a problem for a long time. Is that Nick has been so shut down for a long time that he can't see past his own shit to like validate her. And the more disconnected she feels from him, the more she doesn't see that he's shut down because of his own shit and won't validate him because he's not meeting her needs, and they're going to clash.
Mm-hmm. So any other thoughts on Nick before we move on to treatment?
Honestly, I was thinking this might be another hashtag Nick sucks conversation, but I think
it's a little less lopsided than our last Nick sucks.
Yeah.
That was two Crazy Rich Asians for anyone who's wondering.
Which, check out our TikTok on that, but hashtag Nick sucks is a thing.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we can take another break here and then head into treatment. All right. Who wants to be the first one on the cutting board about treatment? Go.
I'll go first.
What? Hannah first?
So I was thinking about seeing, because a lot of what we understand by the end of the film is that Amy will kind of do anything that she needs to prove that this relationship is valid and healthy and good to the world, right? So it would make a lot of sense if they would see a couples therapist. And so I was thinking about what it would be like to have these two people as their representative in different ways in the film. And really thinking about, especially when you're a new couples therapist, people are going to present to you in a different way than they present at home with their partner, regardless. No matter what they say, they're sitting in front of a person who is supposed to be able to help them feel more connected to the person they're sitting next to that maybe they haven't been able to look in the eye for a decade. So people are always going to present in a little bit of a different way, right? And what I was thinking about is it might even be something where I do the assessment, right? I've talked before about how I see each person individually and I see them together. And then I come back to them and say, this is what it seems like the goals are. This is where it seems like you guys want to focus. And a part of me really feels like I would get this very fake version of the both of them in my office. And both of them trying to act like everything is okay, or really giving me answers that only are connected to the way they wish their relationship was instead of what it's like. So I was thinking about how if you were a green therapist or a newer therapist, it would be really hard to tell if they are actually doing the work at home or if they're sitting in your office and giving you a show for the hour and then they go home and do whatever they've always been doing because they don't really believe that it's going to help or whatever the case might be. And I was kind of thinking about how when you start working with somebody and as a therapist, what is our goal? I believe you. I believe you. You're coming in here. You're telling me this is what you're fighting about. That's what you're fighting about. That's what we're going to talk about. The goals are going to be based on the information that you give me. And so I feel like, and this happens all the time where I have couples where they come in, we have a couple of sessions, and then all of a sudden there'll be like a session where shit kind of hits the fan. And I don't know if that would happen with Nick and Amy. I think it would take a little bit of time but also I think it would really come to show that the way that they interact with each other is so mismatched that I would probably refer them out to both have individual therapy.
God, they'd be Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Yeah. Yeah, like the information that they were bringing in would not feel accurate. It wouldn't feel genuine. And it would be one of those things where we always say, don't work harder than the clients, where the therapist is really trying to figure out what is going on here because they're acting this way and they're talking this way. And then last week they came in and said this and just how
they're acting fine, but they keep coming to therapy.
Yeah, like they're acting fine. They're not doing any of the homework. They're acting like they're fine, but they can't physically engage with the other person, or they won't even turn and look at them when they're saying something. And how important it would be to be able to read their body language, which is a part of doing couples therapy anyway, and how much that would have a big impact on how you could help this couple. And also that sometimes couples are not appropriate for therapy. And I really feel like, because I feel like they would come in under the context of, we're just doing this to prove to the world that we're in a good, we're in a healthy relationship. And I think that could be tricky for a little bit. And also sometimes people come in because they want the therapist to say that they should get a divorce. Sometimes they come in because they want me to say that their partner is right and they're wrong. Sometimes there's all different, people are humans. People come into couples counseling for all different kinds of reasons. And I was really thinking about how hard and how stressful it would be as the therapist to figure out what in the fuck is going on with these two. And eventually to come to a point where I have to say, I really think that you both need individual and come back to me if that feels like an option. But also there's other stuff going on here that just I'm not quite getting. And I've had that conversation with more than half the couples that I've worked with. That's just a part that's just a part of it, because there's other things going on, and that it would be hard to, it just gets really tricky, especially if they're playing out the dynamic that they're experiencing at home with each other. That's it.
Because I'm going to sort of piggyback on what you're saying, but put it in a different context, as if I was seeing Amy and her parents when Amy was a kid. Let's say she's acting out in school, which I think could happen based on what we've talked about with her. Maybe one of her little tricks or bullying or whatever starts to make some marks in class, and then maybe she gets recommended to therapy. That's how I have to imagine it would occur for her parents to do that, since they're kind of in the public eye. And what you're kind of talking about as well is when people go to therapy, not realizing that they're really going to have to be honest about their deep, dark insides as perceived by them. And they think they can go to therapy and the therapist will do something to them. And then they'll just be better without really having to be honest and vulnerable and surrendering to treatment, as I say. So I think if I had to work with Amy as a kid, I think I would pick up pretty quickly that her parents and their relationship is a big part of this dynamic, especially as we've talked about ad nauseum, her persona as Amazing Amy. And I think similar to what you're talking about, Hannah, is I think an obstacle I would run into is I don't know if her parents could really be honest with me about their true role as parents to her, nor do I think that they would be able very easily to get feedback from me about their parenting.
Oh no, talk about cognitive dissonance. Their inability to to just what they're saying and what they're doing. That's where cognitive dissonance comes in, is they'd never see it. It'd be like they're showing some pretty serious differences between what they're actually doing and what they're saying. Mm-hmm. And I think that their parents would do the same thing for you, that they would do exactly that. They would say all the right things and continue doing what they're doing because they can't see the difference.
Yeah.
Because it's incongruent with who they are.
Because I would really have to challenge them about, well, I don't even know if we get that far. I think that they would, similar to what you're saying, Hannah, is I think at a certain point I'd have to throw my hands up, because I would have to say, what you are telling me in terms of your relationship with your daughter cannot be happening with the way that she is presenting to me and to the world. You know, I feel like they would paint a very fluffy, attentive, persona-esque relationship as well. And they'd have a very, I think, specific idea of who Amy is. And I don't know if they could really hear. It takes a lot of humility to do therapy. It takes a lot of humility to do collaborative therapy. So like family or couples. And I always really respect when people can really hear hard things and take in hard things that require so much humility and grace and patience and all those hard emotions to come by in that space. We're also an authority figure, AKA me or any of us in this conversation, is making what's going to feel like a judgment upon them. Mm-hmm. And so I think I would really have to find a very gentle in with talking to her parents. That would require probably a lot of rapport building, and also could be, which is what I try to tell greener therapists when I'm helping them out or supervising them, is that sometimes you will blow up a rapport and there's nothing you can do about it. I think there's also a real life scenario where I finally get to the point where I have to just tell her parents what I'm seeing and thinking. And I just have to be okay with the idea that they might never come back ever again. They might tell me to go fuck myself, maybe in a more like waspy, polite way. That I think as therapists and greener therapists, there can be this idea and pressure that there's a right way to do it where that never happens. And you just have to kind of weigh the pros and cons of taking that risk, and that it's not necessarily your fault, if it is ever, if what you need to say cannot be received because they're not ready. Ideally, if that happens, that person will sit with what you've said and maybe marinate, and maybe not necessarily maybe come back to you because of the blown upness of it all. But maybe the next therapist they see, they can finally, you've loosened the jar, I guess is what I'm saying, for the next therapist that they might have to come up against, or the next situation. Because as we see with someone like Amy, unless they get a lot of help, obviously younger is preferred, as young as possible, these behaviors are just going to change and evolve. They're not necessarily going to go away.
Right.
And they're not going to necessarily grow out of their attachment wound. It's just going to present differently. And so that if they brought me Amy at 9 and it blew up, Amy at 11, Amy at 16, Amy at 25, Amy at 37 is still going to need therapy, whether her parents are going to acknowledge that or not. Well, so that's my thought.
That's where I'd like to piggyback off of you, because I was sort of imagining that I'd get to treat Amy as a young adult, right? 19, 20 years old, trying to find autonomy away from her parents, and was kind of imagining that she would be in a place where her parents really don't take accountability or ownership for the book and what that's maybe done to her and hurt her. So I would use a relational approach to really work with her around healing from the attachment trauma and coping with her parents just not understanding, and really working on setting boundaries with them and establishing how she would want to have an adult relationship with them as her parents. And then also really working on identity and separating herself out from this character that her parents have created, and like, who's the real Amy? What's she like? What does she enjoy? What does she dislike? And hopefully using, art materials. I think art therapy might be really good for Amy, because I think she can talk circles around people, right? And so getting her out of a verbal space, art making, it can be a lot harder for people to filter themselves, or it's a little bit more, you can't talk your way out of it all the time. So I think that might be really nice for her. And just to kind of also explore having fun, letting loose, making mistakes or perceived mistakes with art materials, using things like watercolor, oil pastel, things that are harder to control, right? And sort of managing the frustrations that might come up in those situations, because we know Amy really likes to be in control and have a tight grasp. And so that's kind of how I would approach it in thinking about art interventions or materials that I might use with her. And then again, I think just our relationships, kind of showing her that she can have healthy relationships with other people, even if her parents aren't capable of doing that. That's about them. It's not about her.
Yeah. That's a great point about art therapy.
And then hopefully when she meets Nick, she's just like, see you later, dude. I'm not interested. And we're married because she's just like an independent, interdependent, well-adjusted, healthy human.
Exactamundo.
Yeah. And that's getting someone into an experiential therapy like that is really important when they are smarter than you and they know it.
Because she's smart. She is.
Yep. And that can be an issue when someone uses their intellect to batter you away from their inner self and you can't defeat it because they're smarter than you. Which, obviously happens to none of us, but it can happen to other therapists, right?
It's never happened to me.
I mean, obviously we're the smartest people in every room, right? Totally. No? Oh, all right.
I work mostly with children for this exact reason. I know more than all of you. That's what I say whenever I enter a session with a child.
Yeah, but just because you know more than them doesn't mean they're not smarter than you.
I'm like Miss Trunchbull. But then again, that was a bad analogy because Matilda was smarter than her. God damn it. Oh, this is why I work with children.
For me, I think I'm torn between picking whether I want to work with the adult version of Amy, who's really within my wheelhouse, honestly, of getting through people's defenses and working on trauma is going to take a long time, but helping her rebuild a safe and consistent version of herself is within my wheelhouse. But working with people that are also like Nick, that are also that shut down and traumatized, are even more in my wheelhouse than Amy is, because personality disorders takes a pretty specific training, and working with someone like Amy on a personal level scares the shit out of me, because if you fail her, then she'll flay you. So working with someone like that I feel like would be a threat to me, I think would be a problem in the therapeutic relationship for me. I think someone with her history would need a female therapist, that working with the potential dynamic of having a male therapist, that if she perceived you as slighting them, she could ruin your career by accusing you of things, which I think not with people with personality disorders, with Amy specifically is a concern. Not trying to accuse all people with personality disorders of being able to turn on you like that. Amy as a character scares the shit out of me. This is the scariest movie I've ever seen. So I think I would refuse to work on her and refer her to a female therapist who is competently trained in working in DBT and other highly structured models, or, a mix of things, so that she has a care team available to her. But I would realistically choose Nick, because helping him empower himself is also going to be a long process, because we haven't talked about the end of the movie yet, but Nick is screwed.
Oh, he's fucked.
Nick lost, and he knows it. He knows he lost, and he knows that right now he is choosing the best of a bad situation, that he either puts on a face and plays her game or else. And as she already proved, her version of else is so far beyond whatever you might possibly think could happen. And she'll be so very many steps ahead of you that you won't see it coming, and you will not have any defense whatsoever because even I legitimately did not do it. Not enough. It wasn't until he was able to rely on his relational approach and be himself and find himself operating in a more fluid way as opposed to trying to think his way through it that he survived. And I think for me, working with Nick while he's in this impossible situation, trying to help him manage how do you find and operate the best life that you can in this situation, because it's going to take a certain degree of, I understand that you're screwed. I see you. I see what happened to you. This would have been all over the news. We'd all see it. Like, I saw what happened to you. And now that I'm hearing your side of the story of it, I'm with you. You probably need to be really careful because it sounds like she really does have you bent over a barrel, and we're going to just have to call that what it is and be really mindful that we can't change your reality. And whether it's, it's pretty unlikely you run into a real person like Amy who has you so wrapped up in things that you're lose your free will pretty much. But people do run into situations where they have children with disabilities. They get injured. They have an incurable disease. Something happens that they just have to live with now. And working with people like that to understand that you still do have some control and agency over your life, and you can invest in things that do provide you with meaning and a sense of purpose, even in the face of unimaginable suffering, sometimes is where you have to go. And I think with Nick, working on that kind of existential / logotherapy direction is where I'm going to want to go, because we can't fix it. Amy has one.
I mean, it's also very reminiscent of when you work with a client who's in an abusive relationship and for whatever reason they can't leave or they don't think they are capable of leaving yet. And so you're right. You have to kind of meet them where they're at. You can't get parental on them and be like, no, you have to go or you got to do this. You really have to say, okay, like you were saying, this is the reality you're working with. And so how can I help you live kind of the best version of your life within the confines of this situation until hopefully it changes at some point.
Which I think he's already on board with, like him announcing to the world, like, we're going to be parents when it's Desi's kid, or she took a Sharpie and drew a blue line on the thing. I'm not convinced.
No, she took his, did you not miss that in the plot? She took his little swimmers from the bank and she turkey basted herself. That's his baby. That's his baby.
Oh, I did miss that.
That's his baby.
Because remember he says he pulls the thing out of the trash and he's like, we were going to have a baby and they were going to throw away my sperm and I gave her the letter. Oh, this girl is plotting.
Yeah. Okay. So so he still knows that she's I missed that. But missed that. So obviously that whole smartest person in the room thing is not a fact. But that's okay. We can own that and work it. But he knows he's so screwed. And exactly, like, people are in abusive relationships. I have worked with plenty of men that have been in abusive relationships, plenty of police officers who have gotten themselves into situations not too dissimilar from Nick's because there's something going on and they got into a relationship with someone they shouldn't have that now is threatening their job and threatening all kinds of things. And I only have one side of the story with these people, so I don't know what they're doing to their partner, but that I have seen situations like this where men get stuck too. When men and women both get stuck by manipulative, abusive partners that are playing games with them and threatening their job, have some kind of leverage over them that if you leave me, you won't see your kids. If you leave me, I'll take custody. If you leave me, I'll tell the police about the time you threatened to hurt yourself. Like, all kinds of things like this happen. And sometimes clients have decided that they're not going to take the drastic action, and we as therapists can't choose for them. That doesn't fall under duty to warn. Somebody threatening to take your kids is not something that's duty to warn. We can't do anything about that.
Yeah.
So for me, I think it would be working with that, like helping Nick understand that someone is not going to try to force him to do something he already knows he can't do, but is going to meet him where he's at and help him make the best of the situation he has decided, or the solutions he's decided to navigate his situation.
So we will slide into final thoughts. I can go first. I really like this movie. It's only the second time I've seen it. I saw it once in theaters. I read the book. I love the book. I know it's Gillian Flynn or Gillian Flynn. It's like her biggest novel. She's written 3 big novels, but I will say this. Dark Places is my favorite for anyone who's wanting a book rec, but do not watch that movie with Charlize Theron. Do not watch it. I'm not sanctioning that movie. I'm sanctioning the book that hopefully they will redo into like an HBO show like Sharp Objects. But I will say, I think this movie is really well done. I really like David Fincher and his style and the look of his movies and the soundtracks of his movies with Trent Reznor. So this is a good watch. I don't know if I'll ever revisit it that much because it's intense, but it was more interesting, definitely more interesting to watch now as a therapist than when I watched it before, where I had more of a binary. I fell victim to sort of the more rigid thinking that we were kind of pulling apart during this episode. So that's me. I'll throw it to you, Rachel.
Yeah, I read the book. I love the book. I love the movie. I've seen it. I think maybe this was like my 4th time watching it, but from a different lens. So, with my therapeutic hat on, I really enjoyed it. Definitely this time, I did feel more for both of them. There was a little bit more empathy there for Amy than I had before when I watched it, for sure. Yeah, no, it's good. I dig it.
Good.
I guess I'll go next and we'll find out whether Hannah hates it or we'll ever watch it again and as our wrap up today. But I love this movie. I also really like David Fincher's movies, really appreciate the way that the music and the intensity and the clarity of shots that are used really factor into the story and the tension that he creates with the shots. Like looking at how Amy worked the camera from outside of the door, like making herself look like she's screaming for help through the glass door to just position so that we can see it through the camera was just such a brilliant way to create the psychological tension of, oh my God, she is miles ahead of everybody. This is terrifying. And he did that all throughout the movie. Visual tension is created like that. And I love it. This movie is fantastic. It's so well written. I haven't read the book, but I love this film. I love the way that they acted it. Rosamund Pike is a scary, scary lady in so very many parts. She's so good. Movie where she's playing the woman that takes advantage of the people in nursing homes.
I haven't seen that. I Care a Lot, but I've heard interesting things.
Oh my! You're
forgetting.
Have to watch it.
You're forgetting her best movie performance, which is as Jane in Pride and Prejudice. Which we have done on this podcast, Benjamin.
I think you're ignoring Doom if we're going to talk about her best movie performance.
Doom.
Doom.
The video game movie with The Rock?
Yeah, I'm lying. It's terrible. Don't watch it. Don't ever watch it. We won't actually speak of that. Her and Carl Urban and The Rock. Yeah, no, it was absolute trash and had nothing to do with video game. But anyway, tangent. This movie is fantastic. I love it, and I think everyone should see it as a great example of how movie monsters are made out of mental health, but also looking at it through the lens presented. You heard 4 therapists today go, look, you got to find some empathy that Amy's villainy did not come from nowhere. Yeah. And no one's does, pretty much. Yeah. There's always something, and we always must be able to have empathy even for the villains of life if we're to understand that everyone deserves treatment because everyone is the villain in somebody's story. And we need to make sure that we're able to treat everybody.
All right, Hannah.
I think I've seen this movie a couple of different times. I read the book also and enjoyed it. Didn't like it as much as Sharp Objects, which I also love. I don't think I ever need to see this movie again. Mostly because there's some stuff that happens in it that I'm no longer can really sit through. So I don't think I'll ever watch this movie again. It was really well acted, of course, and was a beautiful adaptation of the book. Truly, like one of the best ones that I've seen. So yeah, that's it.
Well, on that note, thank you again, Rachel, for joining us. Oh, we never said this. Rachel designed the logo for our podcast. So when you see our logo on merch or on, your podcast app and you're listening to us, the profile of the person with the popcorn, Rachel did that. She is an old friend of ours. Yes. We've been friends for years, and we came to her because of our background to make our logo when this podcast was just a little tiny baby in our minds.
It's a baby. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks y'all for having me. It was really fun.
Yeah.
So Rachel, where can people find you?
I have a profile on Psychology Today. I work out of a group practice called the Adney Institute here in Chicago. So yeah, I'll give my info. You can find me down below in the
in the description.
In the description.
In the description.
Hell yeah. Well,
in the description box.
On that note, we will sign off here. As always, leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find us on all social media platforms at Popcorn Psychology, with the exception of Twitter, where it's popcorn_psych. And you can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. Stay safe, everybody.